I know that we are all feeling the effects of a struggling economy. Inflation continues to be up, and I don't know if you have even bothered to open your IRA, money market, pension fund accounts. I don't know if you've chosen to even open the envelopes or not. If you have, you know that investments are down. And in case you don't remember, Christmas is around the corner. And so we have less money to spend, and our money buys less. And so I know many families are struggling to figure out, what are we going to do? How much can I spend? How much should I spend? Who should I buy for? How are we going to celebrate this season? You know, a couple of years ago when COVID hit, we were asking the question, how are we going to celebrate because of COVID? And now people are asking, how are we going to celebrate because of the economy? Things are just difficult financially for everyone. And so I don't know if today is either the worst day or the best day to begin a series talking about money. I'm going to go on the feeling that it's the best day because we're doing it. But also because my hope is that over the next couple of weeks, no matter how we're feeling, no matter where we are financially or what we're looking at into the future, my hope is that we'll begin to look at things God's way. Because God has some ideas and some principles about money that are true whether the economy is good or bad, whether we're rich or poor. And if we can begin to follow some of those principles, I think that we might experience some peace, less anxiety financially, and just a better life. What I want to be clear about, however, is I know that when a lot of people hear a church talking about money, they know that, well, the end goal is for people to give more money to the church. And I want to be clear, that is not our end goal. Our end goal is not to say, hey, look, you need to give more money to Faith Church. That is not the goal of these messages. Really, the goal is that God has some ideas about money that if we can embrace, if we can learn to follow, our lives are going to be better. I mean, we just finished a series on better, and I do believe that if we can figure out how to understand God's principles on money management, our lives will be better. I was surprised to read this week that the Bible talks about how we manage money. It talks about money. It talks about wealth. It talks about possessions over 2,500 times. Maybe second to love. I don't know. But, you think of the things that kind of divide us, as churches or, as Christians. And, those are the things that the Bible talks about very infrequently. The Bible talks a lot about money. And because God has some views on that, he has some principles on that, and no matter where we are, we need to talk about it. Last month we learned that wisdom is better than gold and silver. Wisdom is better than money. So therefore, God's wisdom about money, follow me on this, right? God's wisdom about money has got to be the best. It's got to be the best. And so we're going to look today at just 5 biblical principles about money. And as you hear these, you might immediately think, oh, I know someone who needs to hear this message. No. This is not a message for someone else. This is a message for you. Because it's a message for me. I tell people many times, it's like I preach to myself. And so if you happen to hear something, that's good. You're overhearing it because everything I say I need to hear. And as I wrestled with these 5 principles, during the week, or these last couple of weeks, I realized, man, I need to hear these. In the economy that we're in, the inflation, investments, the financial situations we're in, I needed to hear these. And so please, as you hear these principles, don't think about someone else who needs it. Think about how God's speaking to you, to your situation, to your family. It also might be easy when you hear some of these principles to feel some guilt. I'm not doing that. I'm not living up to that. Please don't allow that guilt or shame to take root in you. If you feel that guilt, just say, God, I confess that I'm not doing it this way, and help me to figure out how to do it your way. Don't let the guilt of how we're not living keep us from experiencing how God wants us to live. Confess the failure. God is just waiting to hear that so he can say, I forgive you. Now let's find some principles and practices to move you to a better place. So really, whether we have a lot of money, whether we have very little money, these principles apply. And I believe that if we can embrace them and follow them, not only will our financial situation maybe improve or we get some peace about it, I firmly believe that all of our life gets better. Again, it was troubling to read this week that the number one cause of divorce continues to be money. And it's not so much how much we have or how little we have that's the issue. It's our different views on it, different views on how we spend it, what we do with it, how much we spend, where we spend it. It's those views that create tension in relationships that often causes marriages to fracture and break. It boggles my mind that it's money that is the number one cause of divorce. And so maybe we need to figure out how to get, together on our understanding of money. Maybe getting together will make relationships in life better. That leads us to the first biblical principle, and that's just get on a plan. Get a plan for your money. A basic financial plan for money is called a budget. You look at how much money you have coming in from whatever those resources are, and then, this is the hard part, you track where it goes. And you write down where you spent it so you can begin to see where that money goes. Because here's the thing, we can't make any changes to our lives financially unless we know what's coming in and where it's going. Once we understand that, once we see a budget, we can begin to do things differently. Get a plan. Planning is important, not just in finances, but in everything. This is what Jesus said. He talked about the importance of financial planning. He talked about the importance of planning when he told this story. He says, suppose one of you wants to build a tower. Won't you first sit down and estimate the cost to see if you have enough money to complete it? For if you lay the foundation and are not able to finish it, everyone who sees it will ridicule you, saying, this person began to build and wasn't able to finish. Financial planning. Jesus is talking about some financial planning. You want to live your life? You want to raise a family? Sit down and figure out how to do that financially. What are the costs involved? Jesus is concerned about, our future, our financial future. It's important to set out a budget because that can help you build to goals. And I'm going to tell you right now, if you don't create a budget, your money will just disappear. About 20 years ago, I sat down with a financial planner. I met him through his son, who is involved in our youth ministry in Lewisburg, and he talked about what his dad did, and I was like, I really could use some help. And so I sat down with him, and Frank's a wonderful man, and he's a faithful man, and he asked me a question that no one had asked me before. He said, what do you want your money to do for you? I'm like, I don't know, feed me, put a roof over my head. He goes, no, what goals do you have for your money? And what do you want it to do? And it's like, I really don't know. I really did. At that point in time, I really hadn't given it any thought. So he said, well, go and think about that and come back. And so I went back and I had some goals like, you all know, I want to be retired. Like I've wanted to be retired since I was in junior high school. And I told him that. I said, well, my goal has always been to be retired. And he laughed because I'm 40 then. And he says, okay, well, what are you doing about it? And I was like, well, not much. he goes, well, then maybe you need to make some changes. And so he said, how much money do you think you can put aside for, and it wasn't just retirement. I mean, I wanted to help my family. I wanted to be faithful to the church. And, I had other goals. But he goes, how much money do you think you can set aside? And I said, I don't know, $100 a month? And he kind of laughed and goes, how about $500? And I'm like, what? Are you crazy? I don't have $500 a month to do that. And he said, well, how do you know? Do you know where your money goes? And I'm like, no. He goes, well, let's look at it. And so we sat down, and I always just had money at the end of the month. I mean, I had a little bit. I didn't have a lot, but I had a little bit because I had no idea where it was going. I just knew it. I would live through the month, and at the end of the month, I still had a little bit of money in my checking account. We sat down and we looked at a budget, and I was still able to do the things that I wanted to do and needed to do, and I don't know how he did it. But he found over $500 that I could begin to put into, a money market IRA. And it's not doing so well right now, but, it'll come back. And if not, God will provide. But I realized, without a budget, I had no idea where my money went. And I guarantee you, if you don't have a budget, you don't know where your money's going. And how can you make a change? How can you make any kind of change? A budget simply is, how much money do I have coming in? And then the harder part really is beginning to track where I spend it. Really, all you need is a piece of paper and a pencil to begin the process. But there are actually some wonderful tools out there. If you are more high tech, there are programs and apps. Some of them are free that you can look at that can help you track all of that. If any of you are familiar with Dave Ramsey and his Financial Peace University, his Financial Peace program, he provides some wonderful free resources about how to set up a budget. He has a Every Dollar app that is free, and you can go on and you can track where you spend your money, and you can kind of see at the end of the month where it is. If you're interested in looking at some of Dave Ramsey's principles, we have his book, Financial Peace, in the library. You don't have to buy the book. You can check it out. Please check it out and bring it back so the next person can read it. But I would encourage you to get a budget. Begin the process, because we can't figure anything else out until we see our financial picture. The second biblical principle is to get out of debt. Proverbs 22 Verse 7 says, the borrower is slave to the lender. The borrower. When we borrow from someone, the bank, a credit card, car loan, we become a slave to them. I remember when I first got a credit card, back in my day, it wasn't all that easy to get a credit card, and so I, looked around, and so I got one, and I read the terms and conditions, well, some of them, and I read the part about interest rates, 18% interest rate at that point in time. I was like, that's a lot of money. I'm known to be rather, I'll say thrifty. I have friends who say miserly. I didn't like that word, so I'm like, really, miserly? But anyway, I'm frugal with my money, and so I'm like, I'm not giving 18% of my money to anybody. So I decided as soon as I got a credit card, I am paying it off every month because I'm not going to do this. Well, one month I decided to buy a computer, and again, back in the day, they were a little bit more expensive compared to other things, and so I was like, well, I think I'll pay it off over 2 months. And so I made the payment for the first month, and then I got the bill the next month. And I looked at the amount of interest I paid for a computer. And I'm like, never again. I am just not doing that again. I'm not going to be a slave to my credit card company. Do you know that the average credit card debt for someone in Pennsylvania is $5,000 a month? I sat down and figured out if you just pay the minimum balance on your credit card, you don't ever use it again, but you just pay the minimum balance so that you don't get any late fees, it'll take you 13 years to pay off your credit card. and you will pay over $3,000 in interest. You're a slave to your credit card company. You're working for them because your hard-earned money is going to them. Do whatever you can do to get out of debt. That may not be true with mortgages and homes. I mean, there's some big purchases, obviously, but we need to work to get out of, at least try to get out of credit card debt. We become a slave. We become a slave to the companies. It's not always easy to try to radically pay down your debt. Sometimes it may be like, what can we forego for a month or two so that we can get ahead of the debt? What kind of sacrifice might we have to make so that we can get ahead of the debt? Because everything that we can pay off means less what? Interest, which means that we're saving money, which means we get it paid off sooner. And as soon as that debt is paid off, there is freedom. We're liberated. We're not a slave anymore. And we experience financial peace. We have some financial margins in our life, so we're not always living on the edge financially. That creates that anxiety. But it's like we can step back from the edge and say, you know what? When I don't have this debt, I just feel some financial peace. Do everything you can do to get out of debt. Again, Dave Ramsey, just on his website or in his book, has some wonderful ideas about how you can quickly and radically pay down debt. I'm telling you, I read through them. They're not easy. It will maybe call for some sacrifice, but the freedom that comes is worth it. Now, the third biblical principle is maybe not one that you would anticipate, but it's very powerful, and that is develop good relationships. 1 Corinthians chapter 15:33 says, "Do not be misled. Bad company corrupts good character." We are who we hang out with. If you want to learn some good financial practices, hang out with people who are living good financial lives. It just makes sense. We learn from the people around us. We pick up ideas and practices and principles from the people who are around us. If you want to learn how to be generous, find someone who's generous and spend time with them. I'm very thankful. Personally, I'm very thankful for my parents and grandparents who taught me financial responsibility and faithfulness. My parents were very faithful in the church. I remember my mom writing a check every week to give to the church. I remember, the offering envelope. I remember as a kid, sometimes I got to put it in the offering, and I remember at times looking at those numbers and thinking, that's a lot of money. And I'm sure my parents looked at those numbers at times and thought, that's a lot of money. But whether financially we were doing well or we were struggling, it was always the same. They were faithful in giving. I saw that. I understood that. I learned that. I also saw my parents work hard, not get above their debt. They work hard, and they talk to us about what the mortgage was and how much the bills were. I grew up in the 1970s and, the oil crisis, and my mom would always say, if you're cold, what? Put on a sweater, put on slippers, put a robe, get a blanket. But we're not touching the heat because our house was oil, and oil was expensive, and we weren't doing that. And I began to understand, if I want to go to college, because my parents were willing to help pay for college, if I wanted to go to college, I need to put on a sweater. I need to sit on the couch and put a blanket over me because I was cold, because we weren't turning up the heat, because there were financial consequences to all of that. My mom got a second job. My mom was a school teacher, so she got a second job that she was able to work mostly during the summers. And we understood, because my mom said it many times, we understood that her paycheck from that job, they paid her once a year in December. That was our Christmas. That money paid for Christmas. We knew that. That's why my mom worked this job, is so that they could provide what we wanted for Christmas. And we knew that it wasn't a lot, and we knew we weren't going to be able to get everything we wanted, but my parents were very hardworking, they were very faithful, and they were very generous. I also learned a lot of generosity by spending a lot of time with my grandmother. I've shared this before. I don't know how much money my grandmother had. I remember being a little kid, and an accountant or lawyer came over, and they were talking about things, and he mentioned how much money they had. And I just remember as a kid thinking, wow, that's a lot. And my grandmother was like, we it's not polite to talk about that. I just knew there was a lot. I knew that she had a lot of money. I never saw her spend it on herself. I don't remember her ever driving a new car. I mean, she drove like the old car. Never had a new TV or appliances. Never bought new clothes. She never spent money on herself. She spent a lot of money on others. She was so generous at Christmas to us and birthdays. Her birthday, she would give us gifts. She goes, well, it's everyone else's unbirthday. It's my birthday. It's your unbirthday. Happy unbirthday. And we'd get money or a gift. I was like, who does this? And I've shared this too. My grandmother had a saying when she would go to a restaurant that I remember to this day. I hear my grandmother's voice when I go to leave a tip. She goes, I've never felt bad for leaving too much. I've often felt bad for leaving too little. You know that feeling? You walk out and you maybe cut back a little bit on the tip, and as soon as you leave, you think, I could have done more. Maybe they're working a second job. Maybe it's a single mom. Maybe it's a student who's trying to better themselves and get into school, and they're working hard, and I could have been more generous. My grandmother taught me so much about generosity, and I'm so grateful for that. Spending time with wise, financially responsible people doesn't mean that we don't rub shoulders with everyone. It doesn't mean that we don't love all people. It doesn't mean that we cut off those that we don't think are doing what we would want to do. Not at all. It just means that we need to seek out and maybe surround ourselves with kind of an inner core of some people who can help us and teach us and show us how to live responsible financial lives, develop good relationships. The fourth biblical principle is to, you might figure this one out, save and invest. Proverbs 22, verse 20, the wise store up choice food and olive oil, but fools gulp theirs down. A fool is someone who doesn't save any of their income. That's not me saying it, please. I'm not calling anyone a fool. The Bible says it's foolish not to save and invest. I was a fool for 10 years. I put some money into my pension fund. I put in the minimum. I could have done so much more. And compound interest, the whole thing. I was a fool for 10 years because I just didn't know where my money was going, and I thought I was doing all I could, and not by a long shot. I was a fool for 10 years. Wasn't that long ago that people who had a emergency financial fund, which is, what you need to save for, save some money into an emergency fund. Wasn't that long ago that people who had that little bit of savings had some financial peace when COVID shut everything down. Having that emergency fund, having some savings, some investments can help us when suddenly everything financially changes. Helps us, be financially secure and peaceful in retirement. Again, I'm thankful for my parents because when I got my first job, which was as a paper boy, literally riding my bike around, putting papers between the doors, old school. When I got paid, my parents said, well, let's open up a savings account. So I started saving my money. Saving my money allowed me to take some trips and to have some opportunities as I was growing up I would have had no other way. I'm thankful, again, for my parents who helped me understand the value of saving, and I encourage you, save what you can. The United Methodist Church, one of our founders is John Wesley, who wrote a lot about money. And one of the things John Wesley said is, earn all you can and save all you can. Two things he said about money. Save all you can. Save and invest. one of God's principles for money management. And then the last biblical principle is to be generous. See, John Wesley not only said, earn all you can and save all you can, he went on to say, and give all you can. Be generous, be radically generous, be sacrificially generous, be incredibly generous, but be generous. There are lots of biblical passages that talk about generosity. I was reading through a lot of them this week, and I landed on this one to share, and I'll tell you why in a moment, but it comes from 1 Timothy chapter 6. It says, command those who are rich in this present world not to be arrogant, nor to put their hope in wealth, which is so uncertain, but to put their hope in God, who richly provides us with everything for our enjoyment. Command them to do good, to be rich in good deeds, and to be generous and willing to share. I chose this passage among so many others in the scriptures because even the poorest among us are rich when we look at the world. And again, this is not to guilt or shame anyone. This is just truth. I looked at some of the statistics, and 1 billion people in the world today live on less than $1 a day. And we're willing to, if we can get a cup of coffee for $1, we're excited. Half the world lives on less than $10 a day. Sometimes we can spend that on one meal at McDonald's. No matter how we might view ourselves as we compare ourselves with the people around us, we're rich. And so this passage from Timothy really is for us. Command those who are rich, okay? I think Timothy would be talking to most of the church in America, and he was like, look, do good works, and be generous. Be generous. It's important to understand that sometimes generosity, we build into it. Maybe we have to take one step and begin to understand how it works and how we're blessed in that. And so we take one step in generosity. And we see God blessing us just because, oh my gosh, this feels so good. I feel so good giving. Maybe I can give again, and maybe I can give more. And so we build and we grow in that. You may be at a place where I'm going to have to build into this. I'll look at the $1. I'll see how I can give $1. There are ways that you can do that, and then maybe next month it's like, you know what? I can give $5. God's calling us to generosity, and maybe generosity grows one step at a time. Here are some great examples of how we can grow in generosity. We're in the midst of Operation Christmas Child. There are boxes out there you can pick up, but you may be thinking to yourself, I don't have the financial resources to put a box together. I understand. Not everyone does. I don't have the financial resources to ship a box or to make one online. Or if I put one online, I'm going to go into debt. Don't do that. Please do not build a shoebox online that you're going to have to pay off over 5 months. Don't do that. Instead, take $1. Drop it off at the Operation Christmas Child table. They'll take that money, they'll gather that money together, and with your help, they'll build a box. They'll pay for shipping. Can you give $1? Give $1. Can you give $2? Give $2. Can you give $5? Give $5. Can you put a box together? Great, put a box together. Can you take 2 boxes? Can you build 5 online? Can you make a donation for the shipping to go, 10 boxes around the world? Whatever you can do, it's an opportunity. Take one step in generosity. And then allow God to just use you and show you how you can do more. This upcoming season is just a time of so many opportunities for generosity. You're going to be hearing about them more and more as the weeks go on. Here at Faith Church, we give away our Christmas Eve offering, and so every year we try to find a organization or a group that we want to bless. And this year, after meeting Archie and Ruslan from Raising Hope Ukraine and all that they are doing in a really challenging situation, we were moved, the leaders of the church were moved to say, we want to give our full Christmas Eve offering to Raising Hope Ukraine. We thought that's a worthy cause, and we know them, and they're on the ground, and this would be great. I just invite you, start saving now for a Christmas offering. If you saved $1 a day, you could put $50 in the Christmas Eve offering. We have about 400 people worshiping with us in person and online. If 400 people gave $50, we'd have $20,000 to give Raising Hope Ukraine. Incredibly generous. See, incredible generosity just starts with every person doing what God tells them they can do. And you may be sitting there saying, I'm not sure I can do $1 a day. That's fine, because you know what? Maybe sitting next to you, in front of you, behind you is someone who can do $2 a day or $5 a day. But together, we can be, as a church, we can be incredibly generous by taking one step at a time. And I guarantee you, as we grow in generosity, God will bless us. I guarantee you. Because this is what God says. The generous will themselves be blessed, for they share their food with the poor. It's Proverbs 22:9. The generous will themselves be blessed. Now, this does not mean that if we give financially, God will bless us financially. God might. God can. What it does mean is that when we are generous financially, God will bless us. However God chooses to, with peace, with joy, with things that are worth so much more than money. Better relationships, stronger family unit. Because you know what? As a family, we're talking about being generous. And so we're growing together as a family. So the blessing is that, you know what? We're just a better family. That's something money can't buy. Generosity can. God might not always bless us with more money when we give money, but God says he will bless because we're sharing what we have with those in need. These 5 biblical principles can change our financial situation, put us on better foundation. We'll see and experience God's blessing. And it doesn't matter who you are, and it doesn't matter where you are, and it doesn't matter how much money you have or how little money you have. Every principle is something we can grow in. Get a budget. Work to get out of debt. Surround yourself with faithful people who can teach you good financial practices. Save all you can. And here's something we can all grow in. Be generous. Be sacrificially generous. Be radically generous. Be incredibly generous. Be generous. These principles make all the difference. They'll improve our financial situation. They will improve our life as we surrender it all to God. Would you pray with me? Lord God, we know that money is a sensitive and difficult issue. We cringe when we hear it. We struggle when we look at our situation. We see where our needs are. We see maybe where more faith and trust is needed. We confess that sometimes our faith and trust is more in the money than in you. And we ask you, God, to set us free, to help us surrender, to embrace biblical principles that will help our lives be better. God, we will turn to your word for so many things. Help us to turn to your word to see how to financially establish our lives. Knowing that when we do, you will bless us with your presence, with your peace, with your power, but also with your provision. God, may we begin to make these principles a part of our lives as we truly surrender ourselves to you. And it's in your name we pray. Amen.